This episode sponsored by Audible. Hello and welcome, history buffs. My name is Nick Hodges, and to celebrate reaching 500,000 subscribers, I'm going to be reviewing a film you've all been begging me to do, Dunkirk. In May 1940, Great Britain was reeling from one of the worst military defeats in its history. For months, the Allied armies had remained hunkered down in France, waiting for the Germans to make the first move, for a fight they assumed would be a repeat of the First World War. But nothing could have prepared them for the speed and ferocity in which the German army advanced. Outflanked and cut off from supplies, the Allies were forced to withdraw to the beaches of Dunkirk. With their backs against the sea, all they could do was wait and hope that the British government would be able to evacuate them out in time. But with 400,000 men standing by, the task seemed hopeless. And it is this historic event that director Christopher Nolan wanted to authentically recreate for the big screen. From shooting on location at Dunkirk, to using real planes, real ships, and a heavy focus on practical effects, he wanted to make the audience see what it was really like. But how successful was he in doing so? Was this movie as accurate as we all hoped it would be? Well, my fellow history buffs, let's find out. This is Dunkirk. Although Great Britain and France had been at war with Germany since September 3, 1939, neither side launched any major offensives. For 8 months, the Western Front remained mostly quiet, whilst Hitler's war machine ravaged Poland and then later Denmark and Norway. These 8 inactive months will be remembered as the Phony War. Despite having the greater numbers, the British and the French wished to employ a more defensive strategy, relying on the safety of the Maginot Line, a series of concrete bunkers and fortifications on the Franco-German frontier, which were built after the First World War, just in case Germany ever threatened France again. The Allies were confident that it was impervious to attack. Even the undefended section like the Ardennes Forest in southern Belgium, which was believed to be impassable to tanks. But that would prove to be a serious military blunder. On the 10th of May 1940, the Germans launched an all-out assault and invaded Western Europe, punching through the Low Countries and overwhelming Belgium and Holland. Most of the French and British motorized and armored units headed to northern Belgium to counter this move. But to the south, 2 Panzer Corps, 1 motorized corps and their close air support trailblazed through the thick but passable Ardennes hills and forests, allowing the Germans to avoid the Maginot Line and outflank the Allies. With great speed, skill and audacity, the panzers raced to the English Channel, meeting little effective resistance. After 10 days, they had reached the sea, creating a corridor that divided the Allied armies, which cut communications, lines of supply, and reinforcements. The BEF commander, Field Marshal Lord Gort, attempted to stem the tide as best he could, but it was too late. On the 25th of May, he ordered a complete withdrawal to the coast, where he hoped to evacuate what he could of the 400,000 men of his command from 27 miles of beaches, all the way from Ostend in Belgium to the harbour at Dunkirk. The decision to abandon France left the remaining French forces in a desperate position, but to press on would risk total annihilation. The Germans continued to increase pressure on the ever-shrinking pocket of resistance, but an incredible effort made by the French, British and Belgian rear guards held them off, buying desperate time for the Allied armies to begin evacuation. Meanwhile, back in London, the British government scrambled to meet this crisis, shocking many by the constant flow of news from across the Channel, little of it good. In the War Cabinet, eyes looked to British Prime Minister Winston Churchill for answers. For years he had warned Parliament of the threat Adolf Hitler posed, only to be ignored and labelled as a warmonger. That was until Germany began attacking its neighbours and invaded Poland, proving to many that Churchill had been right all along, which later helped him become Prime Minister. And it was on his first day of the job that Germany invaded the rest of Western Europe on the 10th of May, 1940. Just 16 days later, on the 26th of May, Churchill gave the order to evacuate as many men possible. As France would soon fall, any men that could be saved would keep Britain in the fight. But not everyone agreed with this approach. The Foreign Secretary, Lord Halifax, insisted on negotiating a peace deal with Germany. If this could be done before the British Army's potential defeat, then the peace terms would be in their favour, one that guaranteed British independence and allowed them to keep their empire. But Churchill would have none of it, and emphasized Hitler's shady track record for breaking deals, meaning that Adolf Hitler couldn't be trusted. On the 26th of May, Operation Dynamo went into effect, and it was tasked with evacuating the British Expeditionary Force and the French army now cut off from France by sea. The numbers predicted to be saved, however, were incredibly bleak. Churchill had expectations of just 45,000 men. The reports coming in from Dunkirk had done little to inspire hope. German air raids had destroyed its vital docks, causing serious delays. Boats had to ferry men from the beaches to the larger ships since shallow waters prevented them from getting closer. It was a slow process that took many hours to complete each journey. The harbour did have two concrete breakwaters that stretched a mile out to sea. These were the West and East Moles, and although they weren't designed to dock ships, most of the evacuated were from the East Mole. On the 27th of May, a desperate call was sent out to the British public for help, requesting small ships of a shallow draft to help ferrymen from the beaches. Several hundred vessels and their civilian crews answered the call, made up of tugs, barges, yachts, trawlers, fishing boats, and so on. And whilst all this was going on, the soldiers knew that at any moment, the Germans could amass and force to finish the job by breaking through the defensive perimeter and rolling onto the beaches, creating a nightmarish scenario. But as each hour passed, no major attacks came. The lightning speed of the panzer divisions had placed them far ahead of the rest of the German army. Despite having the beaches only miles away, they were ordered to wait for reinforcements to catch up. For 2 days they waited, giving the BEF valuable time. Allied efforts were only hindered by the Luftwaffe strafing the beaches and bombing the ships, as well as German artillery fire. Fortunately, weather conditions prevented these air raids from being too effective. The heavy rain had also slowed down the advance of the main German army heading to Dunkirk. That bought even more time for the evacuation. Additionally, the Royal Navy faced attack from the sea by hidden U-boats. Throughout the evacuation, they would lose over 200 ships. Not even the civilian flotilla was spared from the onslaught and lost a quarter of their numbers. By the time the last ship had left on the 4th of June 1940, the Royal Navy had rescued 338,226 men, with 120,000 of them being French, a figure that far exceeded their greatest hopes. But it was also forced to abandon most of the BEF's heavy guns, tanks, vehicles, weapons, and ammunition, supplies that Great Britain could ill afford to lose. This harsh reality was something Winston Churchill needed to remind the people, but also assure them to not lose hope for the dark times ahead. And so, in the House of Commons, he delivered a speech that would forever be remembered by history.
We must be very careful not to assign to this deliverance the attributes of a victory. Wars are not won by evacuations. But there was a victory inside this deliverance, which should be noted. It was gained by the Air Force. Many of our soldiers coming back have not seen the Air Force at work. They saw only the bombers, which escaped its protective attack. They underrate its achievements. If nothing is neglected, and if the best arrangements are made, as they are being made, we shall prove ourselves once more able to defend our island home, to ride out the storm of war, and to outlive the menace of tyranny, if necessary for years, if necessary alone. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. And if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old.
For this chapter, I'm going to be talking about the things I liked in Dunkirk, and they mostly have to do with Christopher Nolan's filmmaking approach. Now, many people praise the movie for its style and how it almost feels like an indie film based on its little use of dialogue and the non-linear editing. The timeline of the 3 story arcs is a little jarring at first and requires the audience to pay close attention in order for the big payoff at the end. It's a ballsy approach for a summer blockbuster, but it seems to have paid off, leaving many viewers satisfied by its artistic approach. Myself, on the other hand, I appreciated the film for a different reason, and that's its incredible use of practical effects. Many times on this channel I've stated how much I love my war movies to look as real as possible. Most of my favourites are from the 60s and 70s, like classics like Waterloo, A Bridge Too Far, Tora Tora Tora, Patton. They all use vast numbers of extras and realistic practical effects that help bring these battles to life. And these days, this style of filmmaking in its purity is a dying art, thanks to the advantages of CGI. But it seems that Christopher Nolan comes from the same school of thought as I do, as Dunkirk is almost entirely practical effects. And by shooting it with modern day cinematography, it has brought us even closer to the action. For example, the dogfights we see here are simply incredible. Aside from just a few scenes, almost everything was shot in the air with real planes. They had 3 working Spitfires, and standing in for the Messerschmitts was the HA-1112, the Spanish equivalent of these German fighters. The close-up shots of the actors from both inside and outside the cockpits were captured by IMAX cameras fixed to the wings of the planes. And while in the air, the actors were able to perform thanks to a real pilot hidden from view in the second cockpit. By shooting it this way, you get a genuine idea of what it must have been like flying these planes, making the dogfights feel authentic. And you start to understand the level of skill that these pilots needed to survive these engagements. A wrong move made too soon or too late and that would be it. In my opinion, these dogfights are pretty accurate, but some historians have criticized their length by pointing out how real Spitfires only had 14 seconds of ammo and rarely shot down more than 1 plane at a time, whilst Tom Hardy's planes seemed to have almost unlimited ammo. Now, aside from the Spitfires and Messerschmitts, I thought it'd be cool to talk about the German Heinkel 111 bomber that we see in the movie's climax. Now, they weren't able to get their hands on a real one since there are none left that still function. Not wanting to fall back on CGI, they built large radio-controlled models that could fly, and the effect is so seamless that I didn't even realize until I began my research. Another sequence in the film that really took my breath away was the sinking of the destroyer. Now, the filmmakers weren't able to get their hands on a working British destroyer from World War II, so what they did instead was convert an old French destroyer instead. To hardcore history buffs, the difference in design is still noticeable, but for the most part they did a pretty good job. Now, my favourite bit of the film is when the soldier on the upper deck looks over and he sees a torpedo quietly approaching the ship.
Torpedo!
I often find in World War II movies that we see a U-boat's perspective when it attacks a ship. From the moment a torpedo is fired underwater, we follow its trajectory and witness the devastating impact. But what I really like here is that by having it from the ship's perspective, we can see what made these U-boats so deadly. Hidden beneath the waves, you wouldn't even know there was one there until it was too late. Not even the sound of a torpedo would betray their presence. It really made me think of what it must have been like for ships crossing the Atlantic during the war. In one moment everything would be fine, and then the next, you see a torpedo slamming against your hull. All of a sudden, the lights would go out, the water would start flooding in, and you'd be trapped in the dark. And in this scene, you really feel as if you're in there with them. Even the exterior shots where you see the ship's heavy mass slipping beneath the waves, you just can't get that with CGI as effectively the way you can when shooting it for real. It's a thrilling sequence, but I should point out that it does sink a little too quickly. In reality, ships take a long time to fully sink, whereas this one seems to go down within minutes, which rarely ever happens. But I'm happy to overlook this small detail since everything else is done superbly, and it may have only been sped up to help keep the plot moving, which is perfectly understandable. For this chapter, I'll be going over Dunkirk's historical inaccuracies, as well as my biggest issues with the movie, and most of them have to do with Christopher Nolan's reluctance to use CGI. Yes, I am aware that makes me sound like a hypocrite, given how many times in my reviews I've said that I prefer practical effects over CGI. I still think that nothing beats showing the real thing, and it's clear that Christopher Nolan believes in this too, which is why you see nothing but practical effects in Dunkirk. You have real planes, real explosions, real ships, even the ones we see sink in the water was all done in front of a camera. Now, I love this kind of approach, and the best part of Dunkirk are when it's used most effectively. But I'm not too stubborn to admit that by refusing to use CGI altogether, it undermines the movie's credibility when you can't pull it off for real. And what do I mean by this? Well, let's take a look at a few scenes.
There are 400,000 men on this beach, sir.
Where? I mean, where is everyone? Because he's right, there should be 400,000 men on this beach, but there's hardly anyone. It should be clogged up with congestion, with people scrambling for space. It should be littered with equipment, tents, vehicles, field hospitals, discarded weaponry, and so on. But what we get instead is a few hundred people queuing up on an empty beach. If this was the turnout for Glastonbury or Burning Man, it would be seen as a disaster. Dunkirk looked nothing like this. If you want to see more accurate representation of how it was, then look no further than Atonement.
Fuck me. It's like something out of the Bible.
This 5-minute shot from Atonement shows more activity on the beach than the entire runtime of Dunkirk. This is what 400,000 men is supposed to look like. So, when we go back to Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk, it looks pretty shit in comparison. I find it quite shocking that a movie with a $100 million budget gets dwarfed by Atonement's measly $30 million. Now, I honestly don't know how limited his budget was on those scenes. Maybe he had to spend most of it for the big action sequences. If that was the case, then maybe he should have done some simple camera trickery to disguise it. I don't know, like put all you guys together in one shot to give the illusion of activity. But doing it this way means you would have to forgo all those epic wide shots he loves so much on those expensive IMAX cameras. The only other solution is to use CGI, to insert computer-generated soldiers in the background. I mean, at least that way it'll be historically authentic. Now, before you say anything in the comment section, I still think that shooting it for real is better than CGI. If you gave me the choice between 10,000 extras versus 10,000 CGI models, I'll go with the extras any day of the week. But if you only have a few hundred guys because that's all you could afford, and you try to tell me that that's 10,000 soldiers, then I'll take the CGI because I'm willing to compromise. Unlike Christopher Nolan, who clearly isn't. Which leads me to my next issue on how some of the scenes were shot on location in the town of Dunkirk. Normally, I would be thrilled about such a decision. After all, Gettysburg was shot on location and that movie is awesome. But there's a big difference between shooting on a military national park that's been preserved for 150 years to shooting in a town that's been completely rebuilt since the Second World War. The town of Dunkirk was bombed to oblivion during the evacuation. Very few buildings were spared from the utter devastation. The Germans were relentless, dropping tens of thousands of bombs. Houses were on fire, there was smoke, dust, debris, rubble, the harbor was completely destroyed, and a third of the civilian population was killed in the carnage. It was, you know, a war zone. But you don't get that impression in the movie. When those British soldiers are walking through the streets, every single building is in perfect condition. It just looks like a ghost town. Again, where is everyone? Where are the civilians? Where are the dead animals, the burning car wrecks? Anything to indicate to me that this is a World War II battlefield and not an empty French town in the 21st century. Shooting on location doesn't mean shit when the set hasn't been dressed properly. Just take a look at Rommel from Saving Private Ryan. Obviously, this isn't a real French village. This is just some set somewhere in England, but already it looks more authentic than what we see here. Now, I'm sure some of you are saying, Nick, they can't dress up Dunkirk because people live in it. Well then, don't shoot there. Go shoot on a movie set in a studio somewhere. You don't see Martin Scorsese trying to pass off modern-day Manhattan and gangs of New York. Another big inaccuracy that deserves a mention is how the movie downplays the role of the Royal Air Force, something many of the real British soldiers believed in back then, as they didn't think that the RAF did a good enough job of protecting them, with some even claiming that the RAF were barely present at all.
Where's the bloody Air Force?
This misconception is reinforced when we see only 3 Spitfires in the movie. Now, whilst it's true that much of the RAF was held back in anticipation for the upcoming Battle of Britain, they didn't just send 3. In reality, 3,500 sorties were flown in to aid the evacuation, but many pilots found themselves getting bogged down in dogfights, which was a big reason why so many ships and helpless soldiers were getting bombed and strafed. Despite their best efforts, the RAF lost 145 planes at Dunkirk. And these losses demonstrate how much more was going on than the impression we get in the film. In the aftermath, the Royal Air Force found itself the target of open hostility from the army over its fixation on shooting down planes, which drew them away from the evacuation areas. This criticism was only silenced later by the heroic performance during the Battle of Britain. But Dunkirk was another matter, and there are accounts of downed RAF pilots being greeted with open hostility by the very soldiers they were trying to protect. To Christopher Nolan's credit, we see an example of this behaviour when the main character joins the queue.
Grenadiers, mate.
Unfortunately, encounters like this were fairly common. There's a great interview from the Imperial War Museum website when an RAF veteran talks about some of the pilots he knew were treated in Dunkirk. They landed by parachute quite near to the beach and then made their way with their parachutes towards the boats. And I recall these officers were not allowed on board one of the boats by an army officer, and it ended up with the pilot officer having to fight his way to get aboard the boat. Although we don't see encounters as awful as this, Christopher Nolan does allude to the tensions between the Army and Royal Air Force.
Where the hell were you?
They know where you were.
This next bit is not exactly an inaccuracy, but it's something I wish was included. One of the biggest reasons why the evacuation was so successful is thanks to the bravery and skill of the 40,000 French rearguard that held off the Germans until the last ship left when they rightly surrendered. Now, the French get a bad rep for surrendering, but this could have been a great opportunity to recognize the sacrifice made by the French soldiers who didn't, as well as the Belgians they fought alongside with. Even though they knew their country was about to fall, they fought all the same, buying time for the evacuation with their lives. Aside from one defensive position in town, we see little French representation in the movie, despite the fact that they made up 120,000 of the total evacuated. Now, just because I wish there was more French and Belgian diversity, please don't lump me into the same category as these people who cry out for diversity for different reasons. Mostly it's just to score political points rather than a desire for authenticity. I'm of course referring to the USA Today review of the film, where the writer said, "The trio of timelines can be jarring as you figure out how they all fit in, and the fact that there are only a couple of women and no lead actors of colour may rub some the wrong way." Unfortunately, what this writer doesn't take into consideration is that minority groups were a minority at Dunkirk. For example, let's take a look at what historian John Broich had to say about India's presence in the evacuation. They weren't large in number, maybe a few hundred amongst hundreds of thousands, but their appearance in the film would have provided a good reminder of how utterly central the role of the Indian Army was in the war. Now, I agree that the Indian Army hasn't been represented as much as they deserve. I just think it should be in something more appropriate than Dunkirk. If, let's say, there was a movie about the Burma campaign, and we didn't see any Indians or Gurkhas fighting against the Japanese, I would be pissed. But if it's just a few hundred amongst hundreds of thousands, then we're kind of splitting hairs here. The same goes for the French African troops that we do see from time to time. Unfortunately, this is not the worst criticism this movie has received. Let's take a look at this bullshit article from The Guardian, which says, Christopher Nolan's movie is an inadvertently timely, thinly veiled Brexiteer fantasy in which plucky Britons heroically retreat from the dangerous shores of Europe. What the fuck does Dunkirk have to do with Brexit? Leavers, Remainers, bitch about Brexit to your heart's content, but stay out of my historical movies. Arguing about diversity is one thing because I can understand where some people are coming from, especially if there's evidence to support it, but this is some serious mental gymnastics. Anyway, I'm sorry about getting a little heated, so let's get back to the movie. Another inaccuracy that many historians rush to point out is the arrival of the small civilian ships that saved the day. Now, whilst it's true that British civilians did volunteer to take their ships to Dunkirk, it wasn't the big game changer like it appears in the movie. In total, these little ships would only evacuate 28,708 men, but they were crucial in ferrying men from the beaches to the big ships further out at sea. Although these brave crews played only a small part, it was nevertheless praised back in Europe. Their efforts would be referred to as the Dunkirk spirit, a phrase that defined how the British people pulled together in the face of great adversity. Now, despite this moment being a little romanticized, it doesn't really bother me. It's a great storytelling device that illustrates what the mood was at the time. The British people were looking for any glimmer of hope so they can make it through these dark times, and heroic feats like this was exactly what they needed. For the most part, I enjoyed Dunkirk and appreciated what it was trying to do. I didn't think there would ever be another big budget war movie with a heavy focus on practical effects, but fortunately, I seem to be proven wrong. I don't know if there'll be another anytime soon, but I certainly hope so. My only issues were with the scope and scale of the evacuation, which made it hard for me to suspend my disbelief. If Christopher Nolan just had a large cast of extras, an authentically dressed set, and so on, then this would have ticked all the boxes for me. But despite these limitations, I could tell that he really cared about the history he was trying to tell. What happened to Dunkirk was a defining moment in British history. Its failures were a very hard lesson, and its successes gave Britain a fighting chance for the battles ahead. It's important to see just how close Great Britain came to defeat and lose its entire army, to gain some perspective of just how precious our freedom really is. I would like to say thank you to our sponsor for this episode, Audible. While researching this film, I listened to the audiobook Dunkirk, the history behind the motion picture, written by Christopher Nolan's historical advisor, Joshua Levine. With a narration of Jonathan Keeble and Leighton Pugh, you'll be able to learn how the film came to be. However, if you're looking for more history of the event, then I highly recommend Alone, Britain, Churchill, and Dunkirk, Defeat into Victory by Michael Corder and narrated by John Lee. Corder's writing, combined with Lee's narration, brings to life Corder's own memories as a young boy living in pre-Blitz London. He also combines both the political struggles and military efforts that made the evacuation of Dunkirk possible. It's a fantastic audiobook, and I highly recommend giving it a listen. Today, Audible is offering our viewers a free audiobook with a 30-day trial membership. Just go to audible.com/historybuffs, or if you're watching this on your phone, just text History Buffs to 500 500. There you can download a title free from Audible's unmatched selection of audio programs and start listening today. It's that easy. Just sign up at audible.com/historybuffs or text History Buffs to 500 500. Well, that about wraps it up. My name is Nick Hodges, and thanks for watching History Buffs. And remember, if you like the show, help the channel grow. If you wish to support History Buffs, then you can now do so at Patreon. And as always, let me know in the comment section what you thought about Dunkirk. And of course, what historical movie should I review next? In the meantime, check out the History Buffs Twitter and Facebook page for new updates. Until then, I'll see you next time.